Hello, you. Welcome back. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever. What have you been up to? I'm Davina Sheffet, singer-songwriter, from a fashion designer, but most of all, painter. Over here we talk about art, style, design, culture, music. I mean, it's a show. I don't have my rings on. Extremely important. Very, very important. Almost felt indecent. Okay, so I am presenting to you today 4 contemporary Black artists. It is extremely important. Yes, a lot has been happening. It is a lot better. We have a lot more representation. Black artists are more and more collected and shown in museums. If I can shine a bit of light and do my part, even though it's a small light, then I'm gonna do it because it's very important that we recognize the huge gap in representation in museums. 85% of art presented is just white, mostly white men. Let's talk about these 4 artists. They are mostly painters, 2 women, 2 men, keeping it equal, very important as well. Let's dive in. Kerry James Marshall. You've probably seen his pieces. He's extremely famous. He has won numerous awards. He has worked with museums, institutions. He's worked with the MoMA, the Met, Venice Biennale, the National Gallery. I mean, you name it. He is an artist as well as a professor, and his practice is about representing Black figures, representing Blackness. So he is committed to only paint Black figures. His characters are uncompromising. He celebrates with the Venus Nigra, for example, Black beauty. He references a lot of African American history. For example, in this painting, Sob Sob, where a girl is going through these books and discovering her history and sobbing. There is a very big emphasis on the importance of knowledge. Kerry James Marshall says that he sees his work as not really being personal, but more representative of an idea, that it is more about making a statement and talking about bigger themes, not so much about self-expression. I would argue that as long as you're painting, it is self-expression, but I get what he's saying. He's saying that his sensitivity is not what is most important in his work. It is the idea in the work. And so that is showcasing Blackness, Black history, even though, you know, Black history, it can't, like, it's not one huge history. You have many Blacks, different Blacks, they all have different histories. But I guess that he's talking more about African American history here. So the way that he decides to really leave a mark is by, I'm quoting him, knowing what the old masters knew.
Stop everything. Did you like, comment, subscribe? Did you check the Patreon? I mean, come on.
So the old masters are the traditional European painters. They have shown really the ideals, the canons of beauty for centuries. So Kerry James Marshall has to know what they know to then create a new ideal. And his ideal is Black. So in that sense, he's really leaving a mark in art history, creating a new ideal, a new canon of beauty. And what he is showing in the paintings is what, I'm quoting him again, you cannot not know. So he is showing what we cannot know. Us as viewers, no matter the race, we have to know that these things happened. The reason, of course, for Kerry James Marshall artist statement is because he recognized the lack of Black figures in museums. And whenever Black figures were in paintings, which they were in Eugène Delacroix, for example, in l'Olympia, but they were always represented as secondary figures, slaves, and they were never the central figure. So that is his problem to solve, to normalize the presence of Black figures in museums and to have it be so technical and so well done that it actually stands an equal chance next to the old masters' paintings. So now an artist that I think is really, really underrated, and she is freaking 90 years old, this lady. Fake, Ringgold, fake,
Ringgold.
She does quilts and paintings. She is an activist, a feminist. She was very involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s, but also very involved in feminism and opening doors for women to be represented in museums. She always tried having her work be shown in museums. She tried to be part of bigger movements like the spiral movements and things like that, and they constantly refused her. So she pushed and pushed, and she even worked with a women's prison at some point because they were the only ones who would agree to work with her. And her work is about African American history, the representation of Black women in America, of Blackness in America. It is extremely politically involved. It is very sometimes hard to look at and just very naive and direct, quite folk art inspired, which is why I love it personally. I love the use of quilts. She's created these story quilts, types of books, paintings, where she tells stories of people that were heroic figures for her. Or she makes up stories to give a fair representation to people that need it. So for example, this I love, she invented and told the story of Aunt Jemima. She was a Black woman showcased on pancakes boxes. And so she made up her story where she is an entrepreneur and she's fabulous and all of that. So she has this very fantasy component to her art, which I love. She has also created books for children and she teaches art as well. She works with quilts because they were imported from Africa and slaves would create those quilts for the masters and for themselves. They would have this expression of patterns and colors. It is a traditional craft. And so picking on that to create and tell the stories that she is telling, which is again, primarily based around oppression, Blackness, and women, I think it's a wonderful medium. It has something very soft to it, very crafty, very it has something quite motherly, but at the same time it tells things that are quite violent. We see Tracy Amen as well using quilt a lot. I always find it to be very interesting in the contrast that it bears. So that's about Faith Ringgold. Of course, she's worked as well with some museums, the Met, the Museum of Baltimore, and the Studio Museum in Harlem. The Studio Museum in Harlem really appears to be a hub that is extremely important, that gives residencies, opportunities for Black artists. And it seems like it is one of the most important places that you could gravitate towards if you are a young person who is trying to make it in the art world and who needs some support. I highly recommend that you watch In the Absence of Light, the documentary on HBO about Black art. This focuses mainly on Black art in America. It's not going to be about Black art in Europe. It's not going to be about African art. It's going to be mainly about contemporary Black art in America. But it's still extremely interesting. So yeah, go watch it. I learned a lot watching it. And I think that it is very concerning that we don't learn about these things in art school. Even in art history books that I have, nothing about that. There's only things about Aboriginal art, African art. There's nothing about contemporary or modern Black art. There just isn't. And I don't understand why. Yeah. Okay, so now this artist, I fell in love with. Like, he is incredible.
Michael Armitage, Michael Armitage, Michael Umtitch.
So he is born in Nairobi and he lives between Nairobi and London. His main subjects revolve around political events in East Africa or Kenya, more in particular. He is quite engaged politically as well. And he paints scenes that really show violence, particularly against the body. So he will represent different scenarios that he has witnessed or read about, or that used to be traditions. So for example, he paints exorcism scenes where these women, of course, only women, would be, what is it called? Possessed by the devil and whatnot. And so a man would have this cloth in the middle and he would, liberate them from I don't know what. There is this painting, that one is very unsettling, where you have this woman just completely naked in front of these shoes, and you can see well-dressed men. That is to simply show that if you wear a bit of a shorter skirt or something a bit revealing in that particular place of the world, that you can just be stripped down naked. And so she is shown completely vulnerable, looked at, and, possibly in danger. He also takes a lot of inspiration on myths. His paintings have sometimes a bit of a religious motifs, and he is also inspired by internet culture. So another thing that is quite interesting is that he doesn't paint on canvas, he paints on lubugo, which is a traditional cloth. So his paintings sometimes have holes. You see a lot of the texture of the lubugo coming through, and it really, oh my goodness, it adds so much to the image and the violence in the image that is depicted, because this material is quite rough. You can see where it is sewn together. It creates kind of these scars almost. He is represented by the white cube. He's been part of the Venice Biennale exhibition, May You Live in Interesting Times. And now the last artist that I want to talk to you about, you've probably already seen her work without knowing her name.
Amy Sherald.
She got instantly famous because she was chosen to do Michelle Obama's presidential portraits. She works with portraiture exclusively and simplified realism, and she paints ordinary people. She doesn't really try to convey really their story and individuality so much as she is trying to turn these ordinary people into archetypes, and they are gazing straight to the viewer, which I find very powerful. And she says that it is a way for her to put these characters in a confrontational position to the viewer. And what I found quite interesting is that she points out, again, the lack of representation of Black figures in museums. That's already something that, I think we are all aware of. But this pointing out this lack of eye contact with the viewer, I never thought of that. I never thought of the absence of eye contact with a Black subject in traditional European art. So, that is quite troubling. And I find very interesting that she sets these portraits always just looking, into the viewer. Hopefully, this will have piqued your interest. I will probably, again, do some other videos about this, just like I'm trying to show more women artists and young contemporary artists. So let me know what you thought in the comments below. And let me know, especially if you have super cool Black artists that you want me to have a look at. Please, write to me in the comments, come and talk to me on Insta. It's always a good time. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.